Good afternoon and welcome to the last panel of day 2 of our 5th Streaming Media Connect virtual event. I'm Eric Schumacher-Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair. Thanks so much for joining us. I know we're all eager to get back together in person, and we're working on that right now with Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach. It'll be happening the first week of November. So if you're interested in learning more about that, the program is online, and Steve Nathans-Kelly, our producer, will be popping that link in the chat if you want to check that out. The program is online, as I've said, and in the next week or so, we will be having speakers added to the program as well. So check that out and please join us in person. Like I always say, even though IBC in Amsterdam says it has a beach, we've got a real one. And I hope to see at least some of you there. A couple housekeeping notes. You may notice that live captioning is turned on your screen. If you're seeing those captions at the bottom of your screen, look just beneath that. And if you want to get rid of the captions, click on the live transcript button and select disable captions or hide captions, and those will get rid of those if those are distracting. If you want to ask any questions during this panel discussion, please enter them in the Q&A tab. The chat will be open, but it makes it easier for us to keep track of the questions here if they're entered in the Q&A tab. And then I will read them to the panelists as we go, or at the end of the panel discussion. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor for Streaming Media Connect, and that's Limelight Networks. They've sponsored a number of these, and we certainly appreciate their help in bringing these great conversations to you. I'd also like to thank the sponsor for this panel, and that's Zenlayer. And Zenlayer's Carlos Morell will be joining us in just a minute as we start talking about reaching global audiences with OTT services and the challenges and opportunities that exist in a global market. Finally, we will be awarding a $50 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee. The catch, you have to be present to win. So we will announce that winner at the end of our discussion. That wraps it up for the housekeeping notes. As I said, we're going to be talking about the global market for OTT services. Unlike broadcast and cable, OTT isn't limited by borders in the same way, or at least it shouldn't be. But licensing limitations, differences in device preferences, and delivery hurdles need to be overcome in order to make global OTT a reality. We'll talk to experts from both the US and international markets to find out how they have expanded their reach in spite of these challenges. And we have got a terrific panel lined up for you today. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their service and how it has grown locally and globally, and a little bit about what their plans are for the future. And let's start with Rebekah Mueller. Rebekah from Disney Streaming.
Thanks, Eric. Yes, so I work at Disney Streaming. My role is managing the global expansion, internationalization, and localization teams for product across Disney Streaming products, which are Disney Plus, Star Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus. We've done a lot of expansion since, let's see, almost 2 years ago, starting in the fall of 2019. And we have just announced that we will be going to expanding our service in Japan in October, and we will be launching to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea in November.
Excellent. So your international plans keep growing quickly. Let's turn next to, let's turn next to Carlos Morell from Zenlayer. Carlos, talk about Zenlayer, talk about your role in the international market, and a little bit about what your plans are for the near future.
Thank you, and appreciate everyone, and happy to be here. So I oversee the media and entertainment, and Zenlayer has built a global edge cloud infrastructure platform that allows basically everybody trying to get into the hard to reach markets. So emerging markets is really where our business is. So we've gone and think of all the hard to reach locations and built out infrastructure and built out a platform to allow companies that are trying to stream or put entertainment or content into these markets smoothly and try to overcome those hurdles that you discussed earlier about local regulations and just know-how and expertise in the local markets. We continue to expand. We've deployed new resources down in South America. We're very heavy into the emerging markets like Indonesia and APAC region, Southeast Asia, and now focusing on the Middle East and Eastern Europe as well. So we continue to grow leaps and bounds every year. So very excited to be here and share with everybody else.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us. Next up is Emily Powers from BritBox North America. Emily, good to see you again. You joined us earlier today for another discussion about scaling your service to grow with your audience. And so I'm glad to see you back again.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's good to see you again. So yeah, I head up BritBox for North America. And I actually was one of the first employees, launched the business in 2017 in the US, then expanded a year later into Canada. And then my team has also been the one to help operationalize the service in other territories as well. So we launched in Australia last year and South Africa just a few weeks ago. So we are continually rolling out in new territories, and the timeline between those launches is getting shorter and shorter. So we have big plans ahead for further global expansion.
Excellent. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Rajesh Nair from DistroTV. Rajesh, good to see you.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. Hope everyone's having a great day. I'm Rajesh Nair, VP of Biz Dev, Distro Scale. We are the fastest growing independently funded streaming service from the US. We've got two products. One is called Distro Stream, which is an end-to-end video monetization and streaming solution for websites. We are installed across 4,000 websites, generating about 1 billion ad views per month. And our OTT B2C service is called DistroTV, which we launched about close to 3 years back. And we've signed up more than 150 live channels and with thousands of hours of VOD content. And my job specifically is to scale up the service in international territories. And, we are focused in the AVOD space. So we monetize content for content creators with our ad relationships. Thanks.
Excellent. So as you can see, we've got a broad range of perspectives and experiences here, but they can all speak expertly to the topic at hand. And I'd like to start with something Rajesh said in our planning discussion as we were coming up with questions for this panel. Rajesh, you said that OTT is making a paradigm shift, planning for the world as one market. Can you talk a little bit more about your perspective on that? And I'd like then to follow up with everyone else thinking about this notion of one global market.
This is the interesting thing, which actually the internet has introduced, right? In the 90s, we all used to live in silos, right? We all were kind of separated from each other. But when the internet came in, suddenly the globe started becoming one, right? Now, we saw the shift happening in print, editorial pieces, then it moved to radio, music. We saw the shift, and now it's happening in video, what we call as OTT. So now content creators, it's more important for them when they plan their content, and it's equally true for broadcasters, publishers, and streamers like us, that we plan the world as one market. And we are already seeing that happening with the Netflixes of the world, where Spanish series get popular in, which probably we might never have even been exposed to a few years back. Now suddenly you not only have access to it, but you also appreciate the multicultural content that's coming through, and that builds audiences irrespective of territory. So now we as humans are connecting with content and stories across the globe, and that I think is a very exciting paradigm shift for OTT. And OTT is kind of enabling that, because video on the internet, on the devices, content is coming to you where you are, rather than you having to follow the content. So yeah, that's my kind of take at it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I mean, if you live in the US and you wanted access to, let's say, British television, you'd occasionally get things on PBS, and that was about it. Now, obviously, that's changed, which leads me into Emily with BritBox. What are your thoughts on one global market?
Yeah, I mean, from a content consumption standpoint, we're certainly in a much better place now today than we were 10 or 15 years ago. What used to be considered a cultural import, bringing British content into the US, is now just seen as part of mainstream media consumption. And, you know, at BritBox, we very much have ridden that wave of interest and demand for British content. When we launched back in 2017, there was definitely an interest and definitely a demand, but then you see this proliferation of content across Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, all have British offerings, and that helped make it more popular and mainstream in the US because there were no barriers preventing them from making that content, importing that content. And so BritBox has really benefited from this broader phenomenon where the demand for this high quality British content has gone up. And when people look for more, luckily that's where we step in and say we are a destination that tailors to that demand specifically.
Absolutely. Now, it's hard to think of a bigger global brand than Disney. So obviously, Rebekah, Disney is coming at it from a slightly different perspective, but your thoughts on one global market?
Well, I think definitely Disney's brands resonate globally. That's what we've seen. It's very beloved. We made a really conscious choice when we were supporting, for example, new languages around the product to make them available globally. So if we have the languages available for a piece of content, we allow our customers to experience that around the world. So if you speak French Canadian and you're in Quebec, you're covered. Or if you speak French Canadian in Germany or Argentina or whatever, you can experience it as well. So we really try to bring our capabilities at a global standpoint. And we think of English and the United States as just one country and one language that we support in our product of many.
All right. And of course, Carlos, with Zenlayer, you're enabling these global and international services to reach their markets. Can you talk about it from your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's people like you and companies like yours that are actually driving us to get to these markets because they're looking for new audiences and trying to tap into new markets and get new perspectives in consumption. So for us, it's a great thing to see. We'll keep trying to go after the hard to reach locations, and you guys keep producing great content and distributing it. And I think that's what we're doing. Right now we're at 190 locations worldwide that we can deliver all these services from. So it's exciting to see how fast the OTT space is growing, and that in turn is going to help us grow as well. So.
Terrific. Rebekah, you posed this question, and I think it's a really strong one. Could you talk a little bit about the process for launching a product or building and then launching a product for international markets as opposed to a domestic one? Do you take a fundamentally different approach, or is the approach the same at the foundation and you just tailor it sort of at a higher level?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we were fortunate in that when I joined the team, I was the first person on the team focused on the global expansion, and it was pre-launch of the product. So we can make some really strong architectural decisions. What I mostly tell folks when they are thinking about taking a domestic product, whatever country that may originate from, and they're trying to take it outside of that country, a lot of the things that people are surprised about that they need to support are things that are hidden within products that you already use, and you don't realize because you've had them for every product that you've experienced for the most part. And some of those are payments are different, right? How people use payments. There's different legal requirements for payments or content ratings. There's different devices that people use and different penetration of devices for streaming in different countries. Different language support. I mean, if you think about Japanese, right? We're coming to Japan this fall. It's a meaning-based language. And so it has core fundamental changes to how search works or how the language displays. But most people don't realize these things because you experience the products that you have. And really, we know we're successful when you don't feel any friction in the product and it's just seamless, right? It's silent. Our success is just a seamless experience and you don't realize where it originates from.
Emily, what's your experience been? You've got BritBox in the UK, you've got BritBox North America, and then you said you're in charge of expanding into all these other territories. So you can certainly speak to that.
Yeah, a lot of my team on the business side support the rollout in all of these new territories as well. And the way I guess we think about it is there's certain elements of product expansion that make sense to have managed centrally and certain elements that need localization. I mean, a lot of what Rebekah was talking about, different payment vendors, You need localized languages. You need your editorial team to be able to merchandise differently in different territories. You may have different types of plans available, whether it's monthly or annual or different promotions. So all of that needs to be able to be managed locally, but underlying it, you want to be able to produce a single app that can be populated in any territory that you are launching in. So you have one set of underlying code that then there are additional layers or maybe different integrations into, but you don't want to be creating 10 different apps that all live on Apple TV or all, live on they live on a Samsung, just in different territories. So it's very much about trying to figure out what can be done centrally, and then what elements need that localization. But especially for us, we license a fair amount of our content, and global rights are not always available. So often the product has content that's different in different territories, even though the overall concept of the proposition is the same.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about rights and licensing a little later on. Rajesh, what has your approach been in terms of building different products for different markets?
So our product is essentially the distribution service. So just by the very nature of it, when we develop for a particular platform, like it's a new distribution platform, like we recently launched on like Samsung television, Sony television. When we develop to their API, we are in principle available across the board. So, we don't, our service is like, as long as we kind of customize it to the APIs of that particular platform, be it Apple TV, Fire TV, etc. For us, as such, the markets don't matter, because as soon as we launch, we are just available, right? The rights of the content is important. So we need to ensure there's geo-blocking of the content partners that are on our platforms based on the markets that they've given us the rights to. And with respect to monetization, the ad plugging that we do is localized to that particular market. So in that sense, the ad products, the integrations differ, but the development per se is to a particular platform. So that doesn't affect us in such a big way. Okay.
Carlos, how about you? And, the next question focuses specifically on the technical challenges that come along with dealing with different markets, but you can build on what the others have said and then go into talking about, technically, what are the biggest technical hurdles that you see when it comes to delivering services in different markets?
Sure. So just to add a little bit more to that. So one of the things that we've noticed a lot is when we're going into one of these markets, companies with applications or services are trying to decouple parts of the application from the core so they can get that localization happening. And so what we've seen is them pushing it out to our bare metal and infrastructure on the edge to get beyond what an actual public cloud can do, because public clouds are in great regions and they provide a great service, but they can't get all the way down into those metro locations. So they can't get all the way down into all of these areas that still have populations of over 1 million people, because they're outside that country or they're not quite that big. And so we've seen a lot of that where it is one code and one kind of idea, but the dependencies are able to make logical decisions on the edge because that compute power is there. And then they're still getting that content fed in across. So it actually creates a very amazing interactive experience, which I think that's what we're all going for. I mean, I know me as a consumer, I want something that pertains to me that I'm interested in based off of decisions that I've made, and you can't get that without having those decisions right on the edge. And all of the other things they discussed is also part of that, right? Payments, paywalls, and all of those things. So we continue to see that pushing down and decoupling. And from a technical standpoint, network is really the key, right? Especially for streaming. If you can't provide a solid, consistent throughput, if you can't have clean connectivity all the way to that end user, that I think is where the biggest challenges are. I think I've noticed a lot of it has to do with these emerging markets. They don't peer very well. There's ISPs, there's monopolies or duopolies, however you want to call it, where there is a particular nuance that is not accustomed to us here in the West or some more mature markets. And so you have to have partners that are connected to all of these different ISPs and provide a service that's across all of these different nuances and can continue to deliver a consistent availability and performance. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Sure. And when we were putting together this panel and I was thinking of a title for it, I resisted using the cliche, that we used to see on t-shirts, think globally and act locally, but it really does sort of come down to that, doesn't it? Having a global strategy, but ultimately you have to think locally and act locally in order to carry it out everywhere. I'm actually going to turn to the first question from the audience because Rajesh, you had mentioned advertising, and I know that doesn't apply to all of our panelists, but in the AVOD space, how do you deal with multiple nationalities? Are there different ads for different country streams, or are the commercials the same and only translated into different languages? Talk a little bit about how having an ad-supported service across multiple territories works.
So the advertising side is actually quite minefield, because that's where it starts getting tricky, because each territory, based on the audience, like the audiences that you build, the advertising requirements are different. So when you plug into ad exchanges, that's kind of straightforward. But when you want to do kind of localized advertising on the content partner channels, that gets a bit tricky. So what we found is we've got relationships with advertisers directly and ad agencies, which is like a plug and play. That's fine. But when we need our sales team to activate it, then based on the content proposition, there has to be customization for that particular content. So for example, if it's a bunch of sports channels that we are going for ads, those sports channels will attract advertisers that are kind of, looking for audiences that are high on adrenaline, that kind of thing. And that kind of is different. Like it has to be invested into each market, so to speak. So as you scale up, those ad relationships are critical, So for us, our strongest relationships are obviously in the US, UK, and Canada, where we are predominantly there. Now, with India, we are forming a very close alliance, and India is a very fragmented and complicated market. But my advantage being from there, I kind of understand that market quite strongly. So, but the challenges faced in the advertising element, it's quite humongous, So yeah, and we are a service that are predominantly funded by advertising because we are an AVOD service. Subscribers don't need to register, they don't need to pay, they don't need to even subscribe to us, right? So we are predominantly ad driven. And that's a very critical element of our business. So yeah, a lot of investments go into that area, basically.
Anyone else have anything to say on the advertising question? I know that for a couple of the services here, it's not central to what you do, but we've talked about, because of where this event is, even though it's virtual, we're based in the US. And when we talk about global expansion, the assumption here is that, of course, you're starting in the US and expanding outside of it. But what about non-US based services coming into the US? Again, I think of BritBox. Emily, you're in charge of BritBox North America, but can you talk about the challenges and experiences that BritBox faced coming into the US and North America, as a UK based service?
Yeah. So when we launched in 2017, we were very fortunate in that we thought it would be a service really targeting Anglophiles and expats, and that it would be this hyper niche audience. But what we found was the demand far exceeded just that very narrow audience. And so, it was a little bit of a luxury. We didn't have a lot of hurdles in launching and growing the business because the demand for the content was so strong. We went through all of the typical growing pains of a small startup. We had a team of about 5 or 10 people launching the business in the early days. So, we had the backing of the BBC and ITV, but we were very scrappy, very small team. So I think all of our growing pains were more related to any small business launching and trying to be really scrappy and resourceful, less about bringing a new export, a new import into the country, because we just found that the demand was so strong that it went well beyond Anglophiles and expats, and it was something that we found was an unmet demand in the market. So we almost, probably our biggest challenge was that we were growing much faster than we had anticipated. And we needed to make sure that the technology, that the content offering, that the level of investment that we had planned was enough to continue that growth and exceed if possible.
Anyone else want to talk about bringing a non-US based service into the US?
Yeah, I'd like to touch upon audiences, right? Like, again, that's a key strategy that it's a part of, for us, we have to be a differentiator in the market, and we are building multicultural audiences which kind of consume the content. So to give you an example, like there are about 50 million Hispanics in the US, right? So, but they cannot get content easily, like, the content that they have an affinity. There are about 6 million South Asians, which are Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis. They don't get content easily. So we plan around building these content niches. And so specifically when you're talking about coming to the US, though our service is widely available in the US, how do we attract audiences to consume it on DistroTV, right? What's the differentiator? So for us, it's important that we go after these niche audiences, we cater to them and get them on our service. So like Emily mentioned, BritBox, that's British content coming to the US. Now, it's not only for the British audience living in the US, it's for the US audience to flavor a bit of Britain, So that's beautiful, I think, like bringing multicultural content together and getting that exposure for the local audiences.
Building on something Emily said about the size of your team when you started here, we have another audience question. Frank Aycock asked specifically about marketing teams in each of the countries where you are, but let's not limit that to marketing. Can you talk, all of you, about the challenges you face building teams in these disparate geographical locations and how you approach that? Rebekah, could we start with you?
I'm sure. I mean, one of the main parts of my day is I work with all of the Disney offices around the world. I think one of the fortunate benefits that I've had with Disney compared to past companies that I've worked for in the global expansion space is that Disney has been a global company for decades. And so we have really well-established regional teams in EMEA, APAC, and LATAM, and country teams in many of the markets that we are in. And that's everything from business development to marketing, all sorts of different functions that we work with on a daily basis.
Carlos, what's your experience been building teams across the world?
Yeah, it's definitely exciting, but also a challenge and lack of sleep. I'm sure as we've all experienced. We have teams in mainland China, India, Southeast Asia, and working our way down south in Eastern Europe. So it's always a challenge, but I think what we focus on is really the person and the teams that have the expertise on the ground. In our case, it takes a lot of technical, but also regulatory knowledge and know-how. In places that are tough to get into, in Southeast Asia, regulatory challenges are quite real. And so we need people that really know what's going on. A lot of times from the foreign side, we anticipate how something's supposed to work, but without that local knowledge, it really, you're not doing yourself a good service. So we focus on that, really localized strengths in order to expand our capabilities and our services.
Emily, could you talk a little bit more about building teams in these various countries?
Sure. Anytime we launch a new territory, we look at what resources can come out of North America, because that's where we have the biggest, most robust team in place, versus what can be managed centrally out of London. We have a management team there, and then what needs to be done locally. And, the question was about marketing, which is a really interesting one, because there's a lot of synergy when you think about media buying and being able to buy digital media, which is something that can be done globally very easily. However, you always need that local expertise in terms of the audience, the best medium to reach them, how to talk to them, the messaging, nuances in spelling. So, we kind of debate that all the time, which is how much of our marketing and media buying can we do globally? Can we run out of whether it's the US or London? And then especially if you want to do things like TV buying, out of home, radio, that's something that really needs to happen with boots on the ground, someone who's there and, is in the market firsthand. But it's constantly a discussion about how can we take advantage of where a lot of the media is being purchased on digital platforms that are global to begin with. And let's just take advantage of the ability to push buttons in a Facebook ads manager versus alongside that, having media and marketing that supports it in market on very market local specific platforms. So that's something that we discuss a lot. I think beyond marketing, a lot of the same questions, and especially as we roll out into some smaller territories, we look to do as much of that as possible out of the North American team and build out the North American team so that they can support other global launches.
Rajesh?
So, we are in a kind of privileged position in that respect because we deal with content partners from these markets, and it is in their interest as well to ensure that audiences consume their content. So there are a big part of our marketing strategy is to work very closely with the content partners who are onboarded. So like I said, we have close to like 200 live channels. So we have very close relationships with them, and we co-promote with the content partners. A lot of our marketing is digital. And again, because we have a service that sits on 4,000 websites, generating about 1 billion ad views, and nearly 250 million unique users every month, we use that platform to our advantage to push DistroTV. So our core marketing team sits out of San Francisco. Now we, in the UK, because we are launching a bundle for South Asians primarily, a press release is going out next week. So now we are kind of looking at a marketing kind of agency from the UK to look after our non-digital activities like outreach and radio and TV, as Emily mentioned.
I took Frank's question and expanded it away from marketing to talk about teams and human resources in general, but I'm glad, Emily and Rajesh, you brought it back to marketing. And I'm going to bring it back to Rebekah to talk about how like you said, a global brand approaches marketing. You talked a little bit about other things that you need to customize for territories and countries, but talk about the approach to marketing that a global brand like Disney has to take with all of these global territories.
Well, marketing is not my main area, but I can answer for a high level. I think, we have a deep partnership between our marketing teams in the US and our marketing teams in the regional office and in the countries. We really try to work with a deep collaboration across teams. I would say it's one of the deepest forms of collaboration I've seen in any company that I've worked in before. It's really amazing to see everyone partner together. And so we have, standards for Disney, but we want to make sure that it resonates with our local audiences. So that's why there's the partnership between the teams. Okay.
We've covered a couple of the things I was going to ask a little later, and I'd like to focus now on the synergy and sometimes tension between global content and locally produced content. Disney, again, is about as close to a universally appealing brand as you could find, but not all services have that kind of content. And so how important is it for there not just to be locally appealing content, but actually locally produced content on the services in the countries where they're being delivered? Rajesh, you want to start with that?
So the debate between global and local, right? That's very interesting because we consume content as long as it's interesting to us, right? So now I think increasingly audiences affinity is becoming increasingly important. So when you produce, say, I'm based in London, so if I'm producing like an English documentary, I have to think, okay, when this is hosted in US, or if it's hosted in Canada, or if it's hosted in Africa, how will that audience react to it? So even though I'm producing content locally for the local market, I have to think of those territories reacting, because ultimately the monetization comes from the audience engagement in those markets, you know. So it's, you never know, it's kind of a hit and a miss kind of thing, but still it needs to be planned, right? And similarly, when we host channels, like, you know, we've seen from our analytics, certain channels do like, which we've not expected, like certain channels which are doing very well in the US, they are doing extremely well in, you know, other territories, right? And we don't know why it is, but there is something that makes it work. And our take is that it's the audiences. So it resonates with a particular stream of people. So it's important to think when you produce content at a global perspective. You know, that's becoming increasingly important with OTT.
Other thoughts on that approach, on that topic, the global versus local tension or synergy?
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, I think Disney has both approaches. When, you know, for example, most folks don't realize one of my favorite parts about Disney content actually is, and this isn't some insider information, you can find it on the internet, but Pixar, for example, has localized versions. So like the film Zootopia, the newscaster is a koala in Australia, but it's a moose in Canada, right? Because those animals make sense. Or if you would imagine seeing kids playing in the background, it might make sense for it to be American football in the US, but soccer in most other countries. And so those types of things are just hidden behind the scenes so that when people are engaging in the content, it makes sense for them culturally. But we also have a locally produced content, for example, in our LATAM launch last November. We launched to the Caribbean, Central America, and South America, and we have a deep history of locally produced content from that team, and it resonates globally. I mean, one great example is Violetta, which is an original from our Argentina team, and you know, there's Violetta concerts in Europe, right, in Spanish language, and people are singing along. So it's really awesome to see that resonate in different forms.
Emily, you said that when you launched BritBox North America, you know, you didn't have the challenge of finding an audience. You had the challenge of building to meet an audience that was even bigger than you suspected. And this is almost maybe it's not a philosophical question, but I've heard a couple of you, and certainly Rajesh, talk about things that have universal appeal, and talk about audience affinity. I'm wondering if you could all address a little bit, you know, without sounding too corny here, our audiences that might have been stereotyped as being only interested in this kind of content, are you finding that, and again, this is where it gets corny, you know, as human beings, we all have some of the shared core common interests and common things that connect with us. And so maybe these borders that are put up artificially, both politically and culturally, aren't quite as limiting as we thought they were. Does that make sense? You know, kind of rambled there.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think there's something in there that I do want to touch on, in terms of when we talk to our subscribers and we do focus groups back in the day when you could do those in person and actually see people in a room together. What we hear a lot is that they love the British content because they see people on the screen that look like them and that is reflective of the world around them. And it's interesting because, like, you talk about like these shared experiences, and you know, what actually British content does something really unique is that they reflect a world that's not over glamorized. And in American television, there is kind of a default to have really glossy actors and actresses. Everyone looks like supermodels. Like, you know, you see a family there, it looks nothing like you know, your own family. And yet when it's just so interesting because it's something that I have heard time and again, which is when people watch the British mysteries and dramas and even crime shows, like, yes, while the mysteries themselves are, you know, crazy plot twists and maybe unrealistic, the people on the screen are realistic. And I think there is a universality to that. Like, people watching feel as though, oh, this person could be my neighbor, or this family looks like my family. And so I think there's something there that the British television is satisfying that the American television doesn't, just by default of you know, it being a much glossier, sexier version of real world.
Right. And I think the same can be said for a lot of the Nordic content
Yeah.
that's produced as well, right? And then the popularity of Nordic noir, both in literature and in television. It's not just about the stories and the plot twists and how dark that stuff is, but it's also about the types of actors and the types of lives they appear to be leading on the screen, being so different.
Yeah, and I think people appreciate that. But at its core, what we hear time and again is that it satisfies a need state for people of just escapism, being entertained. You know, there's learning about other cultures. But I think, you know, and at its core, especially during the pandemic, people just wanted to see things that were familiar, nostalgic, things that were comfortable, that they recognized. And so that's why I think there was an especially big boom of viewing of British television.
That makes sense. Rajesh, what's your experience been there in terms of content appealing across the sort of marketers' boundaries?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'll talk specifically about multicultural content, right? Like being South Asian, you know, when I kind of look at the content coming from the Western markets, I don't feel a part of it in some sense, because the stories are not around my kind of, you know, community, so to speak, but we are quite substantial. But when through this pandemic, when I've started seeing stories like Mindy Kaling's Never Have I Ever, you know, coming through, being in the top 10 in the US, in the UK, that, and, you know, Priyanka Chopra kind of trying to create waves in the US and trying to bring stories, that is very positive, you know, because there suddenly comes a new audience that loves to watch content like we term it as Bollywood, right? The content coming from the Indian subcontinent, which is huge. And that's huge kind of content audience engagement. But the mainstream stories never touch upon these communities. So we at DistroTV will be making efforts to identify multicultural communities that kind of feel marginalized or not represented as much, and integrate them into our platform so that they have these stories resonating within the DistroTV universe. That's a core part of our strategy, you know. So it just touches upon how important like localized content is globally and global content is locally, you know, just kind of highlights that point.
I want to talk about something that someone mentioned earlier, which is the difference in devices that people are consuming content on in different markets. And I'd like to start with Carlos. And Carlos, maybe you could talk about the different technical challenges that brings, but then I'd also like to talk about how that may influence the type of content that is delivered and the way it is marketed. But Carlos, we could start with you.
Yeah, thank you. So content-wise or device-wise, I think everybody feels that mobile is really kind of it, and it's the mobile device or the tablet. But the reality is, with the you know, the flood of 5G in a lot of these markets and the emerging markets, a lot of them are leapfrogging the traditional 3G and going through the stages that we've done in the West, because it's just not cost effective. It's actually better just to leap forward. So they are able to produce a much larger amount of content on these same devices. But a lot of it doesn't go through necessarily the mobile network sometimes. Sometimes it's still Wi-Fi based. So you can still get a tremendous amount of throughput and experience and you know, rich content into these devices. A lot of these emerging markets can't afford traditional PCs. So everything is going mobile in some of the up and coming markets, right? So you do have to be able to balance the both. You know, I spent a lot of years helping international companies deliver content and stream into mainland China, where the mobile market was actually leaps and bounds behind what the Western market was. So you have to take bit rates, you have to pay attention to those, and you have to provide different formats to handle all of this types of nuances from a delivery standpoint. I think from us, having some local infrastructure and being connected locally to every ISP, that is the main thing, because through the ISPs and having a great backhaul, so you're focused on the first mile, which most people handle with their origin, but now that middle mile, which is that long haul, and then now that last mile, which is really from the ISP all the way down to that person is. That's where you have to really make sure that your service is able to address all of those. We've spent a lot of effort in that, and I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the demand is. Mobile, it's just more convenient. I mean, how often are we whipping up a laptop open to watch a video instead of looking at it on a device with some ear pods on? I mean, it's just, it's more efficient for us. And we can start a show, pause it, walk away, go do something else, come back. And it's quick and convenient because we try to cram as much as we can in our day, it seems like. So if we can get a few minutes of catching up on a show on your device, that's what most people are doing.
Right. Rebekah, Disney, has Disney taken that into consideration in terms of the types of devices that are going to be most likely used to consume the content? And has that impacted any of the decisions you've made from a programming or marketing standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that before every planned expansion, we do a deep review of country-specific needs, and so devices are certainly considered in those. We cover most of the devices, global devices available. One key thing that we think about that's really important, I'd say, in the streaming space is about B2B2C partners that we may want to partner with locally. We definitely have a wide reach of partners in that regard locally, but I'd say from a local device standpoint, for the most part, we are covered. And that's always, when you mentioned, think scale globally, but think locally, we try to go above and beyond with how we localize our experience in each country that we go to.
Okay, Emily, how about BritBox in terms of devices that people are consuming your content on?
Yeah, I think similarly, before we go into any new market, the team does a lot of research, surveys in terms of not just overall device usage, but people who may be interested in this particular service. Where do you find them? Because BritBox is not a service that's aiming to be ubiquitous across every single device. We really want to focus our energy and effort on where can we find our consumers. And so we typically do that research, and then we look to what can we leverage that already exists in North America or in Australia. And then are there any new devices that we need to build new apps for? And similarly, as Rebekah mentioned, the team has a lot of conversations with other distribution partners that are existing in the market, because often there may be a dominant telco and it may make sense to do a partnership with that telco from the get-go, or to build our own apps and then do a partnership in a second phase. But all of that comes into play and becomes part of the consideration set of what's our go-to-market launch strategy.
Okay, Rajesh, your thoughts on the device question?
For us, it's important that DistroTV is available to the consumer wherever they are. So that's been a huge shift in the market. Now the consumer decides where they want to consume their content. It can be on a phone, it can be on a laptop, it can be on a connected TV set. For us, it's important that we are available. So as a part of our tech development, we always look at platforms with growing audiences. And if it is substantial, we will develop to that platform. And Carlos touched upon very important points. He spoke about the infrastructure and, ISPs. I mean, these things, when me in BizDev, I just expect that to work, but I know the kind of work that goes behind the scenes to get it to work, right? Because the tech team is developing to ensure that the user experience when they're consuming content is seamless. Because if something doesn't work the way it should, you've lost a customer, and losing a customer, you probably might never get them back. So for us, that element of working on devices where audiences are, that's very, very important.
Let's talk about something else that someone brought up earlier, and I think it was Emily, you brought up licensing and rights. Is the licensing landscape globally getting easier to navigate? What changes would you like to see there would make your life easier? And are they things that you think might actually happen?
I mean, from my perspective, it's gotten much more competitive because there's been an influx of video streaming services in the US specifically. And I'm sure there's been growth in other international markets as well, but I'm not sure if it's just to the same degree as we've seen in the US in the past 12 months. So what I see is a very increasingly competitive market for not just licensing of content, but also creating, commissioning, co-producing content. And, I think that there's some inflation happening right now that, hopefully will rectify in the coming years. But because there's so much demand for content, it is certainly creating a bit of a bubble in the licensing space. I think we're in a really good position with BritBox expanding globally because we can pool resources and come to the table with a global offer and be able to actually see real synergies by pooling resources and investing in shows that we know will work globally. Because even though there's always going to be some localized demand for different types of content, it's really the British mysteries and crimes and dramas that do well globally. So we're doing more of that, but it is becoming an increasingly competitive space.
Rajesh, your thoughts on licensing?
Again, that's a bit of a minefield. So with respect to licensing, content creators are very protective of their content naturally. And giving out licensing rights is always a huge negotiation going on, right? Like for me, when I sign up a content creator, the initial discussion is quick, everyone is excited. And then the legals come in, right? And that's like the to and fro, right? Like the discussions going on each clause, how to position the licensing rights. So it's a bit tricky because content creators are looking to monetize their content, right? And the traditional models are changing drastically. Like, a few years back, it used to be very straightforward. You go to the theatrical release, you go to a DVD release, you go to in-flight entertainment. It's very defined, structured models, right? Now, even with the COVID pandemic, the last year, everything has kind of, changed in this landscape. Like theatrical rights have just gone out. It's not even like, discussed, right? So what's important is the territories, right? And within the territories, okay, what are the rights that are being given to us? Now, for us, it's the AVOD rights, right? Because we are advertiser driven. And that itself is a long discussion because generally content creators are, they like the subscriber model and we are not in that space, and that's fast changing. AVOD is becoming like almost a de facto, like, I think the future, like in the next 5 years, AVOD will be de facto, yeah, because every consumer will have a maximum of say 5 to 10 subscriptions on their phone or device that they subscribe to and pay per month. But AVOD service is going to be free and available, as long as the content is engaging to pull in. So with respect to licensing, a lot of discussion will be around that territory.
Okay. Any other thoughts on licensing before we wrap up? Rebekah, I know Disney's in a condition where you own all your content, so that makes it somewhat different.
Yeah, it's a little easier.
Right, exactly. Let's go around the horn again then and close. I'll ask you this question. Sorry to throw a curveball at you to close it with, but and I'm not asking you to give your potential competitors any insider information, but if you were talking to someone who was looking at launching a streaming service outside of their own domestic market, what would that one piece of advice that you would give them be? And Rebekah, I will start with you on that.
Oh, no, I was just thinking, what would my answer be? Gosh, it's almost starting to, I mean, I think as Emily said, there's a lot of streaming services out there. I think we've reached peak streaming in many ways, and so I think it's really a combination of what Emily Rajesh said, that you need to find your niche audience, right, or partner with those that are existing already. That would be my advice.
Okay, Carlos, your thoughts?
Yeah, from a delivery standpoint, it's along the, you need to find a partner that is really well connected locally, not just the impression of being local, right? They do need to have really strong resources on the ground, support, infrastructure. A lot of times there's a low barrier of entry if you use a service like Zenlayer or some of the other ones that have some sort of resources that you can quickly test, like bare metal, to see if that's the right market for you, because you can quickly fire something up without investing millions of dollars of resources on the ground and test that out. So I would say look for someone that has real connections to the ground to make sure that your effort is not wasted.
All right, on my screen at least, Emily, you're next.
Yeah, I think always understanding local market behaviors and nuances, to what we talked about earlier, like, is there a platform that's of particular importance? Is there a payment vendor? Is there an integration? But also market maturity is really key, because, I come from this perspective of a very much more mature SVOD space, and other markets are still evolving. And so really understanding what stage of growth am I in terms of the market overall. And then finally, to the last point, what Carlos was mentioning about people on the ground, I think you don't need necessarily a huge team of resources of local people, but you do need a degree of local knowledge and ability to navigate a market through people on the ground, because as nice as it may seem to do everything remotely, I think you really lose out on those local nuances without people who are in the market, living and breathing it every day.
Absolutely. And Rajesh, how about you?
Yeah, so if you're thinking of launching a streaming service, don't think come to DistroTV. We'll stream everything. Jokes apart, it is a huge investment. It's there are a lot of nuances. There's lots of things to learn. So you need a solid partner, streaming partner. Specifically, the amount of tech that goes into this, ad ops, it's insane. So what we tell content creators is, you focus on creating content. That's your specialty. Focus on creating audience engagement. Leave the distribution aspects, the streaming aspects, to the experts who just deal with that. Don't get into for us, we will never go into producing content. That's not us. DistroTV is a streaming service, so we will kind of ensure that is taken care of. So yeah, I think that would be my kind of advice. If you're thinking as a content creator, if you're thinking of launching a streaming service, go with a solid partner. So that the pains are very less. And I've seen it with some huge content partners already, right? They are struggling on the tech elements of streaming, because that's a separate minefield altogether.
Absolutely. That's a great place to end up. Thank you so much to my panelists for a great discussion about expanding streaming services outside of local markets into international markets. I'd like to thank our audience for the great questions as well. And speaking of the audience, we do have the winner of the Amazon gift card, and that is Wendy Moore. Wendy, keep an eye open in your email for information about that. I'd like to thank again Zenlayer for sponsoring this panel. Thank you so much. And Limelight Networks for sponsoring all of Streaming Media Connect this week. We've got another day full of sessions tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see some of you again at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric.
So long,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks all.